We are in the book of Hebrews, chapter 11. It's a number of stories about people that walked in faith. So the writer to the Hebrews is writing to try and encourage people whose faith was wavering to keep the faith. Then he says, since you're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, who are the witnesses? Well, he lists them in chapter 11. We're with a story today about a guy that most of you have heard about. His name is Joseph. Some of you maybe follow Ravi Zacharias. Ravi Zacharias he's a preacher, he's an apologist. He and his team, over the last however many years, go to universities around this country, around the world, and I say preach. It's not like an evangelistic campaign. It's like, this is what the Christian faith is, and then they always open it up for questions. That sounds terrifying. Going to university, sitting in front of 3,000 kids, hey, any questions you have about faith, fire away. Fun to watch. So, Yale University, this is a couple years ago, he and his team were there. Interestingly, almost everywhere they go, it's packed out. People are hungry, but they don't even know what they're hungry for. So, Yale University finished the talk, and then there's a time for questions. There's a young man who stands up, and this is his question, a great question. He says to Ravi, if the Bible is really the revealed Word of God, and as Christians say, has the power that it claims to have, how come so many people read it, even know it, and still die unbelieving? Like, if it's so powerful, how is it that some people read it and nothing happens? Great question. So Ravi gave his response, and then the second response came from one of the guys on Ravi's team. His name is Abdu Murray. He has been on the team for a number of years. He was a trial lawyer in Detroit for a number of years, and for 9 years, he set out on a path. He was Muslim, and he wanted to find out what is truth, and is there some faith or some religion that will stand up to truth. And he read everything, and he landed on Jesus. And he couldn't get away from the fact that the death and the resurrection of Jesus was historically undeniable. And if it's true, it matters. So he comes to faith. So in response to this young man, he kind of tells his story. And then he says this, which was really insightful. He said, it's not because the answers are hard to find, it's because the answers are hard to embrace. You hear what he's saying? So often, we don't walk in faith, not because it doesn't make sense, but because it costs a lot. So he finishes by saying that the consequences of believing turn out to be way more than we think, and the cost of the words being true, often we don't want to pay the cost. And that's what keeps us from faith. Joseph. It was by faith that Joseph, this is Hebrews 11:22, says this. It was by faith that Joseph, when he was about to die, said confidently that the people of Israel would leave Egypt. He even commanded them to take his bones with them when they left. Really? That's all he gets? Like one verse? Like, this is the most understated verse in all of the Bible. If you know Joseph's story, all he's got to say is this verse. He says simply that when the breath that Joseph had was almost at the end, he spoke of the coming deliverance of God, and he asked that his bones be buried in the land of his father Abraham. Wow. But the road that led to that, oh my goodness, it was full of suffering, it was full of pain, it was full of drama, and just amazing faith. Everybody that received this letter, the first ones, they knew the story. Here it is. It's found in Genesis. In fact, there's more about Joseph in Genesis. There's more chapters than there are about anybody else in the book of Genesis. Joseph was a man of unwavering, steadfast faith. His story is one of the most beautiful stories ever lived and ever told. He actually ended his days as the prime minister of the most powerful nation in the world, and he not only saved his family, he saved the whole nation. But he also suffered as much as anyone in God's story, except for the Son of God. He was sold into slavery by his own brothers. He was betrayed. He was imprisoned. He was forgotten. He was hated. From the pit to the prison to the palace, his faith never wavers. This is the way Pastor Steve Elliott speaks about it. He says this: to trust in a time of trial and testing is to see the hand of God before you can figure out what he's going to write. That was Joseph. By faith, Joseph. So, here's the story. What did his faith look like? Well, the first thing, by faith, Joseph saw. You're going, wait a minute. Jesus said that faith is believing when you can't see. Well, that doesn't mean you're blind. It just means you don't know. But there are things that you can see, and Joseph locked in on those, and he never wavered. So let me catch you up a little bit in the story. If you remember last week, I talked about Jacob's faith. Jacob was the father of dysfunction. He's the one that, if you look next to dysfunction in the dictionary, it's Jacob's family. It was just an amazing thing that happened. So this is what happened. Jacob has to leave home because he deceived his brother, and his brother wanted to kill him. It's off to a great start. He goes like 500 miles away back to the place where his family had come from, and there he meets his uncle, and a new chapter in the story starts. He wants to get married. Well, his uncle deceives him and gives him the older daughter instead of the daughter that he had asked for. So now he takes the younger daughter, and now the children start to come. Leah, the oldest, has 4 boys. And now her younger sister is jealous, and so she gives her maidservant to Jacob and has two children. And now Leah is jealous that she's catching up, and so she gives her maidservant, and now there's 2 more. And it's just a really happy thing going on. So now Rachel has a child, and she names him Joseph. Now Jacob, God had promised this land to his father Abraham. He's 500 miles away. So he packs up his family, and they make the long trip back to this place. What a family. What a mess. The story of Jacob starts like, the story of Joseph starts like this. He said, now Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. Ouch. That hurts. Most people try to hide it. Jacob didn't. All 3 of my children at one time or another have come to me and gone, you love my sister, my brother, more than you do me. Don't look at me like that. All of your kids have done the exact same thing. They see something and they go, that's because mom loves whatever. It's not easy as a parent. So the worst thing you can do is make it really obvious. Well, that's what Jacob did. I mean, it was clear. That's how the story starts. Joseph was the favorite son. Not only did he favor him, it says that he buys him a coat. Now, if you've heard the story of Joseph, probably the thing you remember is he had a multicolored coat. It's really not that important in the story, but he did have one. So why is that important? Well, it wasn't like a designer coat. It wasn't like he gave an iPhone 10 to Joseph and everybody else got a flip phone. That's not what this was. A coat was a symbol of authority. He was saying, this son is the one. God didn't say it. He said it. Sound familiar in the story? It kind of repeats itself in each generation. So Joseph is set up for a lot of pain. There's a lot of pain in this family. Imagine Reuben and Simeon and Levi and Judah. They were the sons of the unloved wife, the uncherished wife. There's just jealousy and pain written all over the story. So, now Joseph has a dream. Here's the dream. Out in this field, and there's these sheaves of wheat. And Joseph's standing up, and all his brothers are standing up. And then all of a sudden, all their sheaves turn, and they bow down to Joseph. And then he has another dream. And this one, it's like the constellation, and the sun and the moon are there. And strangely, there's 11 stars. And the sun and the moon and all the other stars start bowing down to one star. Guess who it was? It was Joseph. In his wisdom, he went and he shared that with his brothers. You guys, it was so cool. Last night, I'm sleeping, and this dream, like, you're just not even going to believe it. In the dream, we're all there, we're out in this field, and then I turn around, and you guys are all bowing down to me. Like, what is up with that? That's not funny. You know what his problem was? He was 17 years old. I don't think Joseph was doing that out of spite, or he was just 17 and he wasn't real wise. And what I want you to see is the story is set up for pain. The dreams that he had are an important part of the story. He was really unwise in his actions, but he was stalwart in his belief. His interpretation of the dreams was wrong, but his vision was clear. And he believed that it was God who gave the vision, and God was going to guide him, and his whole life he follows the dream. This is not Disney. This is not like, oh, he has a dream. This is something God planted in his soul that I am going to be in front of you. He had no idea what he was signing up for, but he knew that it was God, and he followed. He never doubted that it was God, and that God had a plan, and no matter which way it turned, he always trusted. Now Jacob sends Joseph out to see his brothers. So they're all out working. He's hanging around at the house. Jacob needs to check up on the boys, so he sends Joseph. He's got his coat. Off he goes. You see where he sent him? He sends him to Shechem. Really? If you've been reading the story, just a few chapters earlier, Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, was sexually assaulted by the king of Shechem, the chief of Shechem. It was awful. And now he comes to the family and he says, I just want to see if maybe I can marry the daughter and we can be friends and we can all be this big happy family together. The sons of Jacob say, yeah, okay, let's do that. But if that's going to happen, all your men need to be circumcised. So they all got circumcised. While they're still in pain, the brothers all go and kill every man in Shechem. Totally dishonored their father. Not only deceived, but dishonored. Where does he send Joseph? He sends him to find his brothers. He's got to go right through Shechem. Oh, it's Jacob's son. So good to see you. Wearing his coat. His brothers see him coming, and they are just had it. And so they decide among them, you know what? Let's kill him. We'll put some blood on his coat and tell Jacob that his son was killed. So they're drumming up this plan, and the older brother steps in and says, no, let's not be drastic here. And so they decide to throw him in this pit. So they throw him in this well. There's no water in it. It's really important in the narrative. It says the next thing they did was they sat down and had lunch. You hear what they're saying? They don't care. Their brother is in a pit. Not our problem. They're going to kill him. Then they see these Ishmaelites coming by and they think, oh my goodness, we could actually get some money. So they decide to sell him. And they sell him for 20 shekels, and now he's on the road to Egypt to be a slave. Wow. This guy who had this dream that God was going to, whatever it was going to look like, he was going to do this thing. And now he finds himself going to a country he's never been to, and he's maybe never going to see his family again. He has no idea what's ahead. But off he goes to Egypt. If you read the story in Hebrew narrative, there's signs in the narrative of what you should be looking for. So if you see a symbol or a picture and it keeps repeating itself, it's really important. Or if you see a phrase that it keeps saying, that's really important. Well, the phrase that you see the most in this story is this: God was with Joseph. It wasn't when he was, God, everywhere he went, it says God was with him. When he was in the pit, God was with him. God was present. Often we talk about the presence of God. What is it that we're actually talking about? What does that mean that God's present? Well, actually, he's everywhere. But it's not talking about the fact that he's everywhere. It's talking about the fact that he's here right now. So the fact that he was with Joseph, like, is he with us? Like, or was he with the brothers? Yeah, he was. But Joseph actually lived as though it was true. That's what faith is. You don't have to create reality. You don't have to do something so God is, he already is. You just got to live as though it's true. And everywhere that Joseph went, he honestly lived as if God was standing right next to him. It turns out he was. But he was the only one that had enough faith to believe that that was actually true. He lived in God's presence. Faith is not creating reality, it's living in the reality that already is. Second thing you see in this man's faith is that he feared God. You go, wait a minute. What? He was afraid? No. This is not fear that's afraid. This is awe kind of fear. So the writer to the Proverbs says that the beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. What does it mean to fear God? It means to believe that he's actually God. I had a certain fear for my father. I wasn't afraid of him. But he was a great man. And I would hear his voice in the back of my head. There was things that I didn't do because I wanted to honor my father. Even when he wasn't there, he was there. Well, that's what the fear of God looks like. And Joseph feared God. So this is what happened. Joseph ends up in Egypt, and he finds himself in Potiphar's house. I don't know who named this guy, but somebody named him Potiphar, and that's where Joseph lands. Potiphar was actually a really important guy in Egypt. He was one of the Navy or Army, or he was a really important political person. So he had a big household and buys Joseph as a servant. This is what it says. Verse 2 of chapter 39. The Lord was with Joseph, so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. Why does everything prosper where just Joseph goes? Because everywhere he goes, he brings God with him. When God is there, it's honest and it's righteous, and God just has a habit of being in places like that, and that's what Joseph brought to Potiphar's house, and his house was blessed. So he ends up in the story entrusting his whole house, everything. He's got the checkbook, he's got the credit cards, he's got the passwords, everything. You run the house. Joseph is running the house. Can you just imagine it? Joseph's going, okay, dude, I really was right about this dream. I can see it now. Here we go. And then this is what happened. Joseph was well built and he was handsome. After a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." She was very subtle. But he refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. Wow. Joseph, humanly speaking, had every reason to go along with it. I mean, really. He's betrayed by his brothers. He's living in this place. He doesn't know anybody. His life it's difficult. Like, why not? Lest you think otherwise, Potiphar's wife was very likely very nicely dressed, very well cared for, probably a very beautiful woman. And she didn't one time drop a hint. She came knocking on the door every day. And every day he said no. So you might be thinking, what a holy guy. He probably wasn't even really, yeah, he was. It's profoundly tempting. Why did he say no? Well, he doesn't say to her, "You know what? This could go really bad. We could get caught, you could get pregnant. There's just so many things that could go wrong with this picture." None of those things. He says to her, "I could not sin against my God." He actually believed that God was right there in the room. And turns out he was. And that's why he said no. Because he feared God. So, Mrs. Potiphar, it says one day Joseph shows up for work in the morning and there's nobody in the house. As Americans, you're going, well, that could happen anytime. This wasn't in America. In the rest of the world, there's 30 or 40 people there every day. There's the butler and the baker and the servants and there's just always people there, and the cousins if nobody else was there, it's because that's what was planned. And she planned it, and he came, and she said, "Today." Well, he saw the situation he was in, and the story says that he ran. He turned and he ran. She grabbed his coat. Following any themes here? Just coats everywhere. It's important. So he's like, "I'm not going back for my coat," and he runs. She holds on to the coat, and that night when her husband comes home, she shows him the coat, and he said, "That bum, that Hebrew that you hired, he attacked me, and I grabbed his coat, and he ran away." Well, he can't not believe her. And so now Joseph ends in prison. Why did he do that? Because he feared God. The next thing that happens is he lands in prison. Do not think that this is a prison with cable television, and these are not happy places. What does he do? Well, he goes to prison and he does the strangest thing. He starts serving people. This is what Joseph lands in prison. He's betrayed by his family. Now he's lied about when actually what he did is righteous. And you're asking yourself, is this how God takes care of his friends? What? What does he do? He lived as though wherever it was that God put him, that it was God that put him there, and he just wants to be a blessing. This is what it says. While Joseph was there in prison, guess who was with him? The Lord. I know you guessed. The Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and he granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those in the prison. And he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph. And he gave him success in whatever he did. Why did everybody trust Joseph? Because he feared God. He lived as though God was right there. So, he's in prison. Two guys, doesn't say exactly how long into the prison journey, but two of Pharaoh's men come to prison, the baker and the cupbearer. The cupbearer was the guy who sipped the Pharaoh's wine to make sure it wasn't poisoned. So there they are. Pharaoh got angry with them, throws them in prison. One night, it says in the story that both of them had a dream. The next morning, it says that Joseph came to them the next morning, and he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" That is so profound. When you live the victim life or the poor me life, one thing that you stop seeing is the pain of other people because you're not looking. The fact that he's the one that should be whining, but he has eyes to see, and he reaches out to these two guys. Well, each of them had a dream, and they said these dreams were very troubling. So Joseph helps them to interpret the dreams. Hey, says to the cupbearer, you're going to get out, and you're going to be back in the service of your master. And the baker, good news, you're getting out. Bad news is it's going to be short-lived. You're going to die. And that's exactly what happened. They both were released. The only thing he asked of them was, would you remember me to somebody out there? And they remembered until they got to the door. And then they forgot. Now he's been forgotten. And it says he spent 2 more years. Joseph's faith, it's amazing that in all these places, he never lost sight. He never thought, how is God going to... He just trusted. The next move in his faith is he forgives, and he had a lot to forgive. So he spends 2 years in prison, they forget about him, and then the Pharaoh has a dream. In fact, he has 2 dreams, and he is profoundly troubled. So he calls in his magicians, he calls in all his wise people, and, hey, can you just interpret this dream for me? No, nobody could. So a few weeks into it, the cupbearer, hey, I know this guy Joseph. He was in prison with us. Don't know if he's still there, but that guy interprets dreams. So he calls Joseph out, gets him shaved, gets him, some nice clothes on, and then he's in front of the Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says, hey, they told me that you interpret dreams. Well, he said, actually, no, I've never interpreted a dream. I don't know how. But God can. We could ask him. So he does, and so he tells Pharaoh, actually, both dreams mean the same thing. This is what's going to happen. There's going to be 7 years of just bounty and bumper crops, and then there's going to be 7 years of famine. And so God wants you to know this. If you prepare during these 7 years, you'll survive these 7. The Pharaoh's like, that's it. That's exactly it. What are we going to do? So who can help us figure this out? And he turns to Joseph. And in one day, Joseph goes from being a prisoner to being the prime minister of the most powerful nation in the world. How does that happen? I think it's God. So, explains it to the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh is delighted, and that's exactly what happens. So they build all these silos and barns and fill them with grain, but they're the only nation that did that. So now the 7 years is up, and the famine comes. Well, the Egyptians have enough, but all the nations around them have nothing. So 2 years in, back in Canaan, Jacob says to his boys, if something doesn't happen, we're going to die. And somebody told me, in Egypt, there is stuff, and if you go, they'll sell it to you. So all 10 of them get their carts, and they make this long journey to Egypt. They get to Egypt, and they go to this place where they told them to go, and they pull up their carts, and they explain where they're from, and there's Joseph. And Joseph looks, and he knows, that's my brothers. They look at him, they have no idea who it is. Joseph says to him, where are you guys from? Canaan. Well, you guys, you're spies. I know. You came here to see how much. No, we're not spies. I know you're spies. So then they started talking to each other in Hebrew. They didn't know he spoke Hebrew. This is because of what we did. And Reuben says, I told you, idiots, we shouldn't do it. So Joseph's listening to these brothers, wherever they went, it was wonderful. So now Joseph says to them, look, you are spies. Your father's still living. Oh yeah, he's still living back in Canaan. He's there with our younger brother. Okay, we're going to find out if you're telling the truth. I'm going to keep one of you here. You guys go back, bring the younger brother. When I see the younger brother, I'll know you were telling the truth. We can't do that. Well, that's the choice. You don't have two choices. That's the only one. We can't do that because my father already lost his beloved son. If he loses this other one, he won't make it. So he's not going to lose anybody. Just go. So Simeon gets put in prison. Off they go. It's this whole long thing. They get home. They explain to Jacob, okay, we met this guy. He was a little bit. This is what he said. He's sure that we're spies, and he wants us to go back with Benjamin. No, that's not going to happen. Well, then the grain runs out, and they're all going to starve to death. So now he has no choice. So now Jacob says goodbye to his son Benjamin, and he doesn't know if he's ever going to see him again. Off they go. They get back to Egypt. Joseph is waiting for them. He tells his servants, invite him into my house. We're going to have dinner. And they're all like, oh, no. They get in there. Joseph sits them down in order. Reuben, how did he know that you're the oldest? I don't know, but it's not good. Okay. So they eat, and after the meal, he stands up, and his brother Benjamin is there, and he can't not cry. If you read the story, Joseph cries more than anybody in the Old Testament. Isn't that striking? He lived as though God was right there with him, and he cried a lot. It's almost like the presence of God makes people cry. So he can't hold back the tears, so he tells his servants, get out of the room, everybody out. Closes the door, and then he turns to his brothers and he says, it's me, it's Joseph. Oh, no, this is not good. And they realize, that's our brother. And he throws his arms around Benjamin and he weeps. And they're like, don't kill us. He said, why would I kill you? Go, get my father, come, bring him. And so he tells the Pharaoh. Well, he didn't need to tell the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh heard the weeping. And so the Pharaoh prepares one of the best pieces of land in Egypt for his family. And the whole family comes, and they now live with Joseph in Egypt. Then Jacob dies. The brothers have a meeting. And they said, he was being nice to us because Dad was still alive. But Dad's gone now. This could go really bad. And so they go to their brother and they literally fall in front of him and cry out. Does that picture look familiar at all? It's exactly what God had said. And Joseph says to his brothers, listen to the words. If you haven't read this story, it's so beautiful. It says, Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I God? Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what he is now doing, the saving of many lives. So don't be afraid. I will provide for you, for your children. And he reassured them, and he spoke kindly to them. If God is in the room, unforgiveness is not an option. He always forgives. And the people who live with him learn how to do it too. And Joseph, this beautiful picture, lots of people see Joseph not only as one of the sons of Abraham, but as a person who's pointing to Jesus. And that this is a picture that you see in the New Testament that God is hoping will happen to all of us the day that we're before him and we finally realize how messed up we are. That day for the brothers of Joseph, there wasn't like any hiding. Oh, no, you must have misunderstood. That wasn't us. Are you kidding me? We would never do. Like, yeah, it was you. And the only hope that they had was mercy. And that's what Joseph extended. So don't miss the point of the story. God's goal was not for Joseph to be prime minister. God's goal was to build a people and keep his promise for the coming one day of a Messiah. And he found somebody who was gutsy enough to believe him. So you go, so Pastor, what if his brothers wouldn't have done that? Then what would have happened? Well, God would have still kept his promise. It would have just been a lot less painful. But God always keeps his promise. The other thing you can't miss in the story is that we have this false notion that it's kind of like this formula. If you do this and you do this, then God will make sure that all the right things and the good things happen. That's not in the Bible. In fact, this is one of the choice servants of God that he used to save a whole nation. But it cost him a lot. There's a lot of suffering in the story. But in the middle of the suffering, what the story is saying to us is that everywhere that Joseph went, God was with him. That's the gift. That sounds like a bomber. That's not good. Some of you are going, oh my goodness. So, Joseph believed the promise. In the pit, he believed it. In the prison, he believed it. The gift was not to be prime minister. The gift was God himself. Some of you have heard the name Annie Johnston Flint. Book that tells the story of her life. She was a hymn writer. Is called The Making of the Beautiful. Actually, as a child, Annie was orphaned very young and was adopted by a family named Flint, and that's how she got the name Annie Johnston Flint. As a teenager, she got really serious rheumatoid arthritis. So much so that the last decades of her life, she was not only bedridden, but literally twisted in pain. In bed, she got cancer. She also was incontinent, so lived the last decades of her life in diapers. She ended up going mostly blind. The man who wrote her biography said that when she died, she had been in bed so long that she was covered by boils from head to toe. He said that you needed at least 8 pillows around her just to cushion her. Listen to the words that she wrote. He giveth more grace when the burdens grow greater. He sends more strength when the labors increase. To added affliction, he adds his mercy. To multiplied trial, his multiplied peace. When we've exhausted our store of endurance, when our strength has failed ere the day is half done, when we reach the end of our hoarded resources, our Father's full giving is only begun. His love has no limits. His grace has no measure. His power has no boundary known unto men. For out of his infinite riches in Jesus, he giveth and giveth and giveth again. How does somebody in that place write those words? It's the presence of God. You don't have to get him to be present. He already is. He just asks you to believe it and live like it's actually true. Joseph learned that the blessed life is not achieving your dreams. It's realizing that your dreams are really about God. If meaning in life comes from God, then the thing that gives life meaning can never be taken away. By faith, we're still talking about Joseph. May it be the same with us. Father, thanks for these words this morning, the story that really is about you, that you made a promise to Abraham, and with all the left turns and right turns and mountains, and you always keep your word. And you've promised to come and to live by your Spirit in us. Give us, strengthen our faith to grab onto that and live in the joy of that we are loved by you, that you're not in us because we coerced you. You came to live with us because you long to be with us. Strengthen our faith. In Jesus' name, amen.